The heat was already building in the forward operating base's motor pool, the kind that clung to the skin and made the smell of diesel heavier. Early light washed across rows of vehicles, the air humming, with the steady idle of engines warming up. Fine dust from yesterday's traffic still drifted in the corners, curling around boots and settling on metal. The convoy was lined up in order 3 supply trucks in the center, a lead MRAP at the front, and 2 escort Humvees spaced behind. Elena Carter moved between her truck's cab and the rear tie-downs without hurry, but with no wasted motion. She adjusted the side mirrors until they caught the exact edges of her blind spots. A heavy strap on the forward pallet was twisted once, so she unbuckled and rethreaded it, then tightened until the canvas load cover drew taut. Her hand brushed along the armored cab's interior frame as she climbed in and out, a habit that seemed absent-minded, but was as ingrained as breathing. At the far end of the row, 2 other drivers leaned against a tool cart, watching her. One shook his head. "She checks that truck like she's expecting it to bite her." The other grinned and said, "She's just a temp. Probably thinks the checklist makes her look official." Their voices carried easily in the still morning, mixing with the low thrum of idling engines. The motor pool's roster board hung beside the operations door, names neatly printed in dry erase marker. The permanent drivers had laminated tags, magnetic and fixed in place. Elena's name was handwritten in thin marker, set off to the side with a temporary crew note. She didn't glance at it when she passed. Inside the cab, she eased into the seat and set her boots firmly on the floor. The vibration through the steel frame was constant, low and steady. The diesel engine's rhythm a war drum. She could feel through her heels. She flipped each toggle in sequence, eyes moving over gauges with the calm familiarity of someone who knew exactly where each needle belonged. One of the escorts called across the open space, "You gonna be ready before lunch?" "Carter." The tone was playful, but there was a ripple of impatience under it. She didn't answer. The last tie-down needed another half-turn, and the mirror on the passenger side had caught a glare from the rising sun. She adjusted it 2 degrees inward, enough to cut the flare without losing the lane view. A round hair. The motor pool kept its rhythm metal clanks from toolboxes, the distant slap of a fuel hose against a tank, and the smell of hot sand, mixing with exhaust. The other drivers talked about routes and fuel stops as if the day's work was a simple delivery run. No one noticed how her eyes tracked the MRAP's angle in the lineup, how she glanced at the Humvees' turret mounts as if checking for clean lines of sight. When the commander stepped out to give final instructions, Elena had already secured her gloves, set the radio to the correct frequency, and memorized the positions of every vehicle in the convoy. Her posture was easy but attentive, her focus on the road ahead even before the engines roared into motion. She knew from experience that the road could change in seconds, and she treated every mile as if it might. The low growl of her engine stayed steady, the war drum in her bones, ready for whatever the day decided to bring. The convoy eased out of the base's main gate and onto the long ribbon of road that cut through the scrub desert. The early sun threw long shadows across the sand, stretching the silhouettes of trucks and Humvees until they rippled over uneven ground. Heat shimmer was already starting to lift from the asphalt, bending the air in thin, restless waves. The lead MRAP kept a steady pace, its turret gunner scanning the horizon with the slow sweep of someone expecting a quiet run. Inside her cab, Elena Carter settled into the rhythm of the drive, but her eyes were never still. Every few seconds, they moved from the windshield to the side mirrors, catching slices of the world that others ignored. In the glass, she studied the staggered line of vehicles behind her, the distant rise of land to the west, the flicker of sun on something metallic along a fence line. She noted the angles and stored them away. The radio carried an easy flow of voices from the lead vehicle. One of the escorts joked about how the only thing to watch for out here was a tumbleweed crossing the road. Another voice replied that quiet days like this were when bad luck woke up. Laughter crackled over static. Light and untroubled. Elena listened without comment, her left hand resting on the wheel, her right brushing the inner frame of the armored door in an unconscious gesture. The steel was cool in the shadow. Solid on her hair fingertips, she knew exactly what it could stop and what it could not. The road bent between two low ridges, a place where the shoulders narrowed and the scrub thickened. She recognized it instantly as a choke point limited maneuver space. Plenty of cover on either side. Her eyes moved over the ground, noting patches where the dirt looked fresher, darker than the surrounding sand. She kept her speed steady, mirrors angled to hold both ridgelines in view. Behind her, the second supply truck kept a comfortable gap, its driver humming along to music just loud enough to bleed into the radio channel. The beat was out of place in the stillness. Elena tuned it out and kept her focus on the edges of the road. She spotted an old tire, half buried near a culvert. Its sidewall split open. Not new, but in the wrong place. Another mental note. The terrain opened up again, the ridges falling back into low, rolling ground scattered with thorny brush. A faint dust cloud smudged the horizon ahead, pale against the sky. She keyed her mic and asked if anyone else saw it. The MRAP commander glanced, then replied that it was probably nothing, wind pushing grit off a dry riverbed. The others let it drop. Elena kept watching until the cloud thinned and drifted east. The sun climbed higher, changing the color of the ground from cool gold to a hard, flat tan. The contrast made shadows sharper, giving depth to every rock and brush patch. In the mirrors, Elena tracked the slow shift of light across the convoy's armor, watching for anything that didn't belong in the reflection. The steel skin of her truck caught the glare, flashing back at her in broken fragments. Between those flashes, she imagined the metal for what it truly was, a wall between life and death, one she trusted but never fully relied on. A gust lifted sand across the road, rattling against the undercarriage. The sound blended with the deep, steady rumble of the diesel engine, a constant presence under her boots. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, checking the far ridge one last time before the road straightened again. The others saw only a clear path ahead. She saw ground that could change in an instant. The convoy rolled on, engines humming, radios buzzing with low conversation. To most of them, it was just another day's drive. To Elena, every mile was a field of possibilities, each turn and shadow carrying its own quiet warning. The break in the road came without warning. One moment the lead MRAP was rolling steady, its tires biting into the sun-baked asphalt, and the next its brake lights flared, throwing heat shimmer into jagged ripples. The convoy slowed in uneven bursts, each driver reacting a half-second behind the one ahead. Elena Carter eased off the throttle, letting her truck settle into a smooth stop. The heat pressed down harder now, trapping the smell of diesel and rubber in the still air. Through the windshield, she saw the MRAP's commander lean out, scanning the road ahead. 50 meters forward, something interrupted the otherwise smooth surface, a scattering of debris near the center line. Chunks of metal and rock were arranged just unnaturally enough to raise suspicion. Heat distortion blurred the edges, but the shapes were wrong for random roadside scrap. The escort Humvees pulled up short, and their doors swung open. Soldiers stepped out with a kind of deliberate urgency, weapons up but barrels low. The casual banter from earlier had been replaced by clipped, functional radio calls. Over the shared channel, the MRAP commander reported a possible IED ahead and requested verification before they moved closer. The order to hold position echoed through the convoy. Elena's gaze slid to the side mirrors. The left one caught the profile of the second supply truck, dust settling around its tires. The right reflected a narrow slice of open terrain, where a thin veil of sand shifted in the distance. For a moment she thought it was the wind. Then she saw it again, movement, low to the ground, with the kind of rhythm that didn't belong to weather. Her fingers rested lightly on the inner frame of the armored door. The steel felt warm now, the heat soaking through, She kept her eyes in the mirror long enough to see a faint puff of dust rise and fade. In her experience, that was the signature of someone moving along the ridge at a low crawl. Static crackled in her headset as the MRAP's gunner reported a metallic glint beyond the debris. Just for a second before the heat haze swallowed it, the commander asked for confirmation. One of the dismounted escorts moved closer, crouching to inspect the road, then called back that they needed more time to clear it. Elena's jaw tightened. The idling engine beneath her was steady, its low hum vibrating through the seat into her legs. But it felt louder now, like the measured beat of a war drum, counting down to something inevitable. In the stillness, the sound was almost oppressive. Every vehicle in the convoy sat exposed, heat shimmering off their armor like a signal flare. She watched the mirror again and saw the dust shift once more. Slightly closer this time. It was subtle, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. She knew the signs too well. The slow approach, the patience of someone waiting for the right moment to strike. The command channel remained filled with procedural questions. Someone asked for higher approval before moving the MRAP forward or ordering a bypass. The delay stretched, and with it came the tightening sense in her gut that they were running out of time. Her voice stayed low, meant only for herself. Too slow. In the cab, the air felt heavier. The sun's glare bounced off the windshield and made the dust in the air glow faintly. The smell of heated steel and engine oil mixed with the faint metallic tang of sweat inside her gloves. Outside, the soldiers moved carefully, their silhouettes rippling in the heat waves. The difference between motion and stillness seemed paper-thin, waiting for a decision to push it one way or the other. Elena's hands closed a little firmer on the wheel. She didn't need to see the road ahead anymore. She had already measured the angles, the distances, the time it would take to move. The war drum of the engine kept beating beneath her, steady and ready. As the seconds stretched longer than they should have, Elena Carter did not wait for the order that still hadn't come. Her right hand gripped the gear lever and slammed it into reverse, the jolt running through the truck like a muscle tightening. The gearbox growled in protest, metal teeth biting and catching. She pressed the accelerator, and the diesel engine roared no longer the steady hum of a war drum, but a rapid, pounding beat that pushed against the silence of the stalled convoy. The truck lurched back, heavy tires clawing into the packed dirt. The steering wheel vibrated hard under her hands, the column trembling as she twisted it left, then snapped it right, bringing the armored nose around with deliberate force. The rear axle groaned as the weight shifted. She swung the MRAP armored supply truck broadside, interposing its steel flank between the convoy and the dust-shrouded ridgeline, where she had seen movement. Lead MRAP. Hold. She called over the radio, her voice level but edged with steel. Rear vehicles. Track my turn and stay tight. She didn't give them time to question. The truck's tires skidded slightly on the top layer of dirt before biting deep, loose gravel popped against the undercarriage. The dust she kicked up swirled and rose fast, a pale curtain drifting into the convoy's line of sight. It thickened with every backward shove of the accelerator, blurring shapes into shifting silhouettes. High-ground eyes would see nothing clear, just heat shimmer and a wall of grit. Metal creaked under the torque of her maneuver. The straps across the cargo bed groaned, canvas covers fluttering against the pressure of displaced air. Her arms worked the wheel constantly, small corrections, keeping the truck exactly where she wanted it. Each adjustment sent vibrations up her forearms, muscles straining against the resistance of a vehicle built to survive direct fire. A voice cracked across the comms, sharp with disbelief. Who the hell's driving like that? It came from one of the escort gunners. But Elena ignored it. She was already reading the mirrors. One eye on the convoy's spacing, the other on the faint ghost of movement still visible through the dust wall. The side mirrors, once frames for clear open road, now reflected chaos, blurred outlines of vehicles repositioning. soldiers shifting to cover angles they hadn't planned on. She caught the flash of a Humvee's roof gun swinging toward the ridgeline. Another mirror glance showed the lead MRAP holding, as ordered, its turret tracking high. The dust was doing its work. Curling over the convoy like a protective shroud, it clung to the armored panels, softened the edges of the trucks, and muddied any clean target picture from above. She could feel the heat building inside the cab, the stale mix of exhaust and grit tightening the air. Her gloves were slick against the wheel, but she kept her grip firm. The engine's rhythm pounded through the floor, faster now, matched to her heartbeat but steadier. The sound filled the cab, echoing off the steel panels that enclosed her. The truck was no longer just transport. It was a barrier, a steel hull between life and death, and she knew exactly how to wield it. In the gaps between mirror checks, she adjusted her position by inches, each movement precise, each turn of the wheel calculated to maintain cover for the entire convoy. The dust was thicker now, settling into a dense haze that made the vehicles seem to fade in and out of existence. Only those inside the formation would understand the pattern of movement. To anyone else, it would look like confusion. The comms were more clipped now. No wasted words. A rear driver reported clear alignment behind her. Another confirmed their weapon arcs were set. Someone else muttered about not being able to see a damn thing. But Elena tuned it out. Seeing clearly was her job, and she had already mapped the space in her head. Her shoulders ached from the strain, her forearms tight from countering the truck's resistance. The wheel fought her at every turn, but she knew the feel of it, knew the point at which force became control. A thin film of dust coated her skin, where her sleeve met her glove, and the taste of grit was in her mouth. She held the line, broadside and steady, until the convoy's formation was locked. Only then did she ease the engine back to a sustained idle, the war drum slowing but still ready. The road ahead was cut off by debris. The road behind was shielded by her dust wall, and for the first time since the halt, they were no longer fully exposed. The dust wall held thick around the convoy, muting colors into dull shades of tan and gray. Shapes moved as shifting silhouettes, vehicles ghosting in and out of the haze. Elena Carter gripped the radio handset, her voice steady despite the weight in the air. She called each vehicle by number, giving spacing and turn sequence as if they were on a drill pad. Not pinned under threat. 2. Hold until 3's clear. 3. When you turn, keep it tight. 4. Wait for my mark. She released the mic, eyes flicking between mirrors. The first crack of gunfire came faint through the dust, a muffled popping that found its edge only when it pinged against steel. A round smacked the side panel of her truck. The sound, a hard metallic slap. Another followed. Then a burst. She felt the vibration through the seat. Each impact a sharp tremor. The armor held, absorbing the fire with the dull confidence of metal built for worse. Elena, they're on your side. The rear escort's voice was tense, almost drowned by the overlapping chatter. I see them, she replied, eyes catching faint muzzle flashes in the side mirror. Keep your arcs. Suppress when you've got a line. The diesel engine roared higher as she eased the truck forward in a slow, controlled arc, pivoting on the narrow track. The steering wheel pulled hard against her, and she fought it with practiced pressure. Shoulders tight. Another burst of gunfire hit the cab, and this time the impact rang through the cabin, like someone slamming a hammer against a drum. A dull thump sounded somewhere behind her. She knew that sound an RPG leaving the tube. The blast followed seconds later, hitting the ground close enough to throw grit against her window. She adjusted her turn by 1/2 meter to keep the convoy in her shadow. Her truck, still the wall between them and the ridge. The gunners opened up then, short controlled bursts into the dust. Flashes of light swallowed almost immediately by the haze. The air filled with a layered rhythm, the war drum of her engine, the staccato of rifles. the hollow clang of rounds against armor. It was chaos. But she kept her tone, even when she keyed the mic again. 2. Now. 3. Follow his line. 4. Be ready to roll as soon as he's clear. Her words cut through the static, and they moved as told. In the mirror, she saw the silhouettes realigning. The tight U-turn taking shape, tires churned up more dust, deepening the cover. The convoy's movement was a slow-motion ripple, each vehicle folding into the next, avoiding collision by bare feet. Her truck took another hit on the passenger side, the force rattling her teeth. She kept her speed steady, letting the others pivot around her lead. Through it all, the mirrors gave her fragments, the flicker of return fire from the rear escort, the brief glow of an RPG reload before it vanished behind the ridgeline. The final vehicle cleared the turn, sliding into formation. She shifted forward, opening space for the lead MRAP to fall in behind her. The dust was thick enough now that the ridgeline was a suggestion, not a threat you could see clearly. Still, she kept her truck angled until the very last moment, holding the shield position until the entire column faced the way they'd come. Only then did she drop the transmission into drive and push the throttle, the war drum beneath her feet, beating in time with the convoy's escape. She didn't raise her voice or celebrate. The movement had been clean, almost surgical, and every driver had followed without hesitation. That was the point. Leadership in the open wasn't about shouting. It was about doing the thing that left no room for doubt. The convoy's speed eased once the last bend took them out of direct sight of the ridge. Engines downshifted in a rolling cascade, the roar fading into a lower, steadier hum. Elena Carter kept her truck in the lead position, hands fixed on the wheel, eyes sweeping from the road ahead to the side mirrors and back again. Behind them, the dust wall they had created was still visible, a hazy curtain hanging in the air, marking where the kill zone had been. On the radio, the clipped, tactical voices of minutes earlier began to loosen. A burst of relieved laughter came through from one of the escort crews, followed by overlapping comments about never seeing a turn that tight and still can't believe we pulled that off. The adrenaline was bleeding into their tone, disbelief, replacing the tension. One voice broke through clearer than the rest. The rear escort's driver asking, "Carter, where the hell'd you learn to drive like that?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were back on the mirrors, scanning for the faintest hint of dust movement that didn't belong to them. The road stretched straight ahead for a long run, the horizon shimmering under the sun. Heat still poured in, carrying with it the metallic tang of the cab's interior and the faint oil-scented warmth of the engine. The armored hull around her was quiet, except for the steady vibration under her boots. To her, the cab was a private space, one that held no need for conversation. Through the glass, she caught sight of the convoy behind her. Drivers leaned forward in their seats, the earlier casual posture replaced by the kind of alertness that came after a close call. Some were still shaking their heads. One Humvee gunner rotated his weapon slowly, keeping it high but scanning. The ridgeline was long gone from sight, but no one truly turned their back to it. In her mirrors, the dust from their passage thinned but lingered, a pale smear against the distance. It was the kind of image she had seen too many times before: road dust in the rear view, a symbol not of safety, but of the gap between one danger and the next. The space could be minutes or hours, but it was never permanent. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, flexing her fingers against the leather. The relief others felt didn't reach her the same way. This was the middle ground. She knew well the part after you get clear, but before you can call it done. Her gaze shifted from left mirror to right, catching glints of sun off metal, tracking the movement of each vehicle's shadow across the road. As the convoy settled into its new formation, she kept her speed steady, letting the distance from the ambush grow while refusing to let her guard slip. In the mirrors, the dust line faded further, but she watched it until it was almost gone, until the road ahead demanded all her focus again. Survival had never been the end for her. It was only the mark that told her it was time to prepare for whatever came next. The fallback point was little more than a flat stretch of dirt off the main road, wide enough to park the convoy without blocking the route. Engines wound down one by one, leaving behind the low, steady idle of Elena Carter's truck. Dust from their arrival hung in the warm air, curling slowly toward the ground until it settled over boots, fenders, and the edges of gear. The convoy commander stood near the lead MRAP, helmet under one arm, delivering a brisk debrief. His voice carried just enough to reach the group. Crisp and factual timeline of contact. Vehicle positioning. Actions taken. He noted the turnaround as executed with minimal exposure, but didn't name the driver who had made it happen. Nearby, one of the escort crew leaned against a tire, talking quietly to another soldier. Whoever was driving Carter's truck, that was clean, not just lucky, either. Every angle was exact. Didn't see her flinch once. The supply clerk, usually the first to joke at her expense, shifted his weight and added, "She's not just a temp. Heard she used to be a sergeant. Ran MRAP convoys overseas. A lot of them." His tone had lost its usual casual edge. Elena didn't look up from her work. She was at the driver's side, crouched with a pressure gauge in hand, checking the tires one by one. The metal of the tool clinked softly against the valve stem, the sound precise and rhythmic. A fuel line hissed faintly as she resecured its cap. The cab's armored door stood open beside her, its frame catching the afternoon light, the steel still carrying the heat from the road. In the space between heartbeats, memories surfaced unbidden. Desert night runs under blackout. Headlights off. The road visible only as a ribbon of darker shadow. Radio static cutting through with sudden bursts of contact reports. The deep, percussive sound of rounds striking armor. Her hands locked on a wheel then, as they were now, reading the terrain as much by feel as by sight. The war drum of the diesel engine steady beneath her, telling her when to push and when to wait. A couple of drivers from the rear vehicles glanced her way, the casual dismissiveness of the morning replaced by something quieter, not admiration exactly, but curiosity edged with respect. They spoke to each other in low tones, but she kept her focus on the job. The commander wrapped up the debrief, his voice fading as the group began to disperse. Elena finished the last tire check, replaced the gauge in her tool pouch, and swung herself into the cab. She reached for the ignition, the engine's idle deepening slightly. That familiar vibration coming up through the seat. She did not join their conversations, nor did she acknowledge the sideways looks. The work was the same as it had always been: check the machine. Keep it ready. Be prepared to move when needed. Experience was something you carried, not something you announced. The dust around them continued to settle, but in her mirrors, she still watched the road behind. Back at the forward operating base, the motor pool yard had begun to cool in the evening air, but the day's heat still radiated faintly from the metal surfaces. The ops tent stood off to one side, its canvas flaps drawn, a strip of harsh white light spilling across the dust. Inside, voices murmured over keyboards and paperwork, the clack of typing punctuating the low hum of a fan. Somewhere in that glow, an official report was being completed. The language would be flat and careful, successful avoidance of possible engagement. A few lines noting vehicle positions, convoy spacing, and minimal damage. No names attached. Out in the yard, Elena Carter was bent over the open bed of her truck, sliding the last crate of bottled water into place. The plastic edges rasped against the steel floor. Her gloves were dusty, the knuckles darkened from handling cargo straps. She tugged each one tight, the buckles snapping into their locked positions with sharp, efficient clicks. There was no one around to see it done. The faint smell of hot engine oil hung in the air, drifting from the vehicles that had already returned and cooled. Her truck, though, was still idling, the deep vibration running up through the frame into her boots. The rhythm was steady and familiar. The war drum she'd known in different deserts, on different roads. It didn't quicken for memory, and it didn't slow for the end of a shift. Long shadows stretched from the fence line across the yard, dark fingers reaching toward the row of parked trucks. The light from the ops tent fell short of her, leaving her in a dim, even twilight. She moved with the same pace she had that morning, methodical, unhurried, but without pause. Somewhere behind her, a clipboard changed hands. A signature landed on a report, and the day's work was marked complete in a file. She didn't look toward it. Instead, she climbed into the cab, closed the door with a solid, familiar weight, and set her hands on the steering wheel. The leather was warm from the day, the steel bones beneath it unyielding. She sat for a moment, watching the yard through the glass. The air was still, the horizon just starting to dim into the deep colors of approaching night. Ahead lay the same road she had left hours ago, though now it existed only in her mind. The imagined line of dust rising into the air. That was the dust she thought about, not what trailed behind. But what waited ahead? The engine's hum was the only sound in the cab, low and steady, filling the space like breath. She rested her hand briefly against the dash, feeling the subtle vibration travel through her fingertips. No one would call her name in the next briefing. No mention would be made of what she had done. But the truck was fueled, the cargo was secure, and the road would come again. She would be ready. Because readiness wasn't an act for her, it was the rhythm she lived by. As the last light slipped below the horizon, Elena shifted in her seat, eyes forward, the war drum of the diesel steady under her.